It is Wednesday, December the 11th, 2019. This is the Dissident Peasant Podcast, and I am your host, Jeff in Georgia. On today's show, Two Lebowskis of Merit. Yeah, something a little different today. Not much history, just a personal reflection on our society's cult of merit. It's just on my thoughts, some reading, personal experience, and of course my favorite movie. Of course, before I get to all of that, just a brief reminder that today's show, like all of these shows, is brought to you by listeners like you. We've gone to patreon.com/dissidentpeasant and have become recurring donors for as little as $1 a month. Thank you so much for your support, audience. It means more to me than I could possibly put into words, so I won't give it too hard a try. I will just say that I rely on your support each and every month. Thank you very much. You can make a one-time donation at paypal.me/dissidentpeasant. You can find headquarters at dissidentpeasant.com. You can check me out on Twitter at JeffIsDudeness. On with the show. My favorite movie is the 1998 Coen Brothers' The Big Lebowski, for lots of reasons. One angle of the movie that's always appealed to me is the mirror images of the film's two Lebowskis, both tellingly named Jeffrey, and both completely opposed to one another. The Big Lebowski is a philanthropist, a man of business and refined taste, a war veteran, allegedly worth millions of dollars, an achiever. His house is huge and in L.A. County, his walls plastered with awards and proclamations in his honor. He has a butler named Brant and a young and beautiful blonde wife named Bunny. Quote, I can look back on a life of achievement, on challenges met, competitors bested, obstacles overcome. I've accomplished more than most men, and without the use of my legs, end quote, he says of himself. And of the other Lebowski, the dude, he asserts that well off as the Big Lebowski is, he can't solve the dude's problems. In this case, compensation for a soiled rug. Only the dude himself can. Quote, your revolution is over, Mr. Lebowski. Condolences. The bums lost. My advice is do what your parents did. Get a job, sir. The bums will always lose. Do you hear me, Lebowski? The bums will always lose. End quote. Is the dude a bum? Well, yes, he is. Especially in conventional terms. He lacks steady employment. How he makes a living is mysterious. Strongly suggested to be tax-free. He dresses in a manner befitting his tastes, not the world's. He rents his dwelling instead of owning it. He commands neither men nor money. He cannot always tell the difference between a weekday and a weekend. A deadbeat, a loser, someone the square community won't give a shit about, all by his own admission. Now the dude has friends, interests, beliefs, tastes, and hobbies, and a way of being that, when all tied together, asks very little from the world and has much to recommend it, I think, especially in a world like ours with so much emphasis placed upon very real material concerns, and one is urged to either run the race or else be stampeded. But even I would agree that the one Lebowski dislikes the other because of his lack of qualities bound up in a single word, merit. And when I think about the role of merit in society, many particulars come to mind. But I want to start with this one, because perhaps none are so salient in these times as the fight for national, socialized health insurance. A single-payer system funded through progressive taxation, universally accessible to all in the United States. Usually we just call it Medicare for all. So I'll note briefly that the Republican Party is universally opposed to this project, to say nothing of truly socialized medicine. So let's totally set them aside for this. As for the Democrats, there are undoubtedly forces almost as committed to doing nothing on this front as the Republicans, and so we will set them aside as well, with the dubious extra criteria that none of those Democrats seem to be very popular when running for president. What is left, broadly speaking, I'd say, are two camps. What is where I lie, and hopefully you lie. Socialized health insurance is a long overdue, really run-of-the-mill reform that's been successfully implemented in dozens of other countries already. We desperately need it for reasons both mundane and heart-wrenching. To save our country money, yes. To foster a more healthy population, yes. But also to put an end to medical bankruptcy, an end to profiteering at the expense of those unfortunate enough to be disabled or sick, the turning of so much pain and so many tears into a dragon's horde, complete with monsters greedily sitting atop their piles of money, snarling at anyone who looks askance at the state of affairs. This must end. And the champion of this cause in the presidential race is unquestionably Bernie Sanders, who's been saying much the same for decades. So what of the other camp, though? They realize that proclaiming we should do nothing or nothing much to reform this state of affairs is a quick way to get lumped in with those who have already set aside, for both ideological and practical reasons related to their popularity in the contest to be president of the United States. But they also can't bring themselves to support a national health insurance program, disruptive as it would be to those huge piles of money in the private sector. And their objections and alternatives sometimes go something like this. Hundreds of millions of people are currently covered through health insurance they have access to through their employers. Now, true, not all can reasonably be expected to receive health care this way, the chronically ill or disabled, the elderly, children, and so forth. And for these classes of people, a public program is appropriate, one that they or someone responsible for them must buy into, of course. But for others, those who work for a living, they should be striving for those jobs with good health insurance. They should go to school, study, work hard, climb the ladder, cultivate their merit. And then they too need no longer worry about their health insurance. Literally, their life should depend upon such a state of affairs. For this is the 21st century. This is global capitalism, and that means competition. Competition between each other, between our companies, between our nations. Why wouldn't you want to live in a world where merit is rewarded? Why would you take those who suffered and waited for years to climb the ladder, who finally got that good job with good insurance, and place them into the same public program as the nation's laziest bums? Why should the dude, legal name Jeffrey Lebowski, have the same health insurance as the Big Lebowski, legal name Jeffrey Lebowski, when the first gets high all day and has no reliable employment, while the second is a war veteran and a man of great achievement? The one lacks merit. The other has it in abundance. Yet in the end, the Big Lebowski is revealed to be a fraud. To paraphrase the Dude De Ching, the worst achievers have no faith in the bums, so the bums reveal them for the phonies they are. Access and quality of health insurance, and therefore health care in the United States, being tied to one's merit, setting aside that in reality even so-called good insurance usually sucks ass when you try to use it, is just an extreme example of the cult of merit, one that literally demands human sacrifice. Polished fascists at high levels of the United States government who are interested in immigration speak endlessly of a merit-based system. Scholarships based upon merit and not need are the style among philanthropists. Raises and bonuses and promotions and even hiring are all proclaimed to be decided by assessing, as best it can be assessed, the merit of the candidate in question. And by this I do not mean the common definition of merit, that quality of being good or worthy in a particular way. Nearly all people are capable of possessing merit in that they care for others in some way, or raise a family, there for their friends. They helped make something or achieve something through time and effort and money that in the end was worth it. So I believe, anyway, but that's not really the quality I'm talking about. No, more narrowly, we might think of merit as signified by modern credentials, your level of education, what institution you attended, your grades while you attended, certifications, honors, resume shit, sure. And that's how this is usually thought of, and for good reason. It's how we're taught to get one of those coveted good jobs. What's conspicuously left unsaid in this framing are at least two things. The first is that to obtain those credentials takes the requisite potential in human terms, a favorable environment, and sufficient material resources or help to afford to pay tuition and spend at least some time learning and not earning. This by itself doesn't exist to narrow the number of people who can get the credentials and education they need to make a living, because the worthy must be separated from the unworthy. It narrows the number because the spots themselves are limited. It turns out that human potential in general terms is greater than ruling class propaganda would ever have you believe. There are many, many more people capable of doing well-paid professional work than there is well-paid professional work to do. So constant upward adjustments to the amount and quality of credentialing and merit needed to get a good job are inevitable. A second thing left unsaid by this framing is the fact that some people just aren't much good at this narrow definition of merit. Some people just don't excel at standardized tests or writing essays or solving trigonometry problems on timers, and still others might do better, if not for psychological or environmental factors. What's more, our society compensates some professions and activities far differently than others, despite them each requiring similar levels of skill and knowledge to perform well. As an example I'm somewhat familiar with, take becoming a professional musician who is skilled enough, say, to get on the call list to play the second violin part in the symphony. Reaching that point in your life is an incredibly expensive and arduous task that almost everyone who tries at fails. And those who succeed are rewarded often by making just enough to pay their bills for a couple months at a time. No politicians spend their stump speeches clamoring for more writers and artists and musicians. Universities do not run ads about their award-winning history or literature departments. No, politicians clamor for more engineers and IT experts. In the university's cases, they run glistening ads with robots, computers, and 3D printers, promising to help you join that glistening world. Empirically speaking, what is meritorious and how meritorious a thing is subject to great change. Now, I've thus far avoided using the word meritocracy because I'm not really discussing rule by the meritorious here, and I don't really think that's quite the ideology on display for consumption. But I do feel as though the time has come to broach the subject. I have no other ready word for a society that rewards or claims to reward through prestige and money this thing called merit. And it's what most people think of when they hear the word meritocracy probably. So let's just go with that for convenience from now. Meritocracy, a system where merit is promoted and rewarded, not a system where the power to rule flows from merit. But that the meritocracy is not objective and that merit is not a static concept should already tell you that what is on display is an ideology grafted onto changing reality, a word that explains away instead of explaining. Some people might know that the modern word meritocracy dates from a work by Michael Young, an English sociologist, published first in 1958 in a work called The Rise of the Meritocracy. Written from the perspective of a sensible and intelligent scholar in the far future of England, it details how their modern society of rule by merit came to be and what it looks like. In it, the IQ score reigns supreme. Schools are strictly segregated by intelligence. The House of Commons has been disempowered and the House of Lords re-empowered through reforms to its powers of membership. And the House of Lords is now appointed almost completely on the basis of intelligence score. Recently, scientists in that world have been able to predict with broad accuracy the future IQ scores of the whole of the population of England, when taking into account patterns of reproduction and trends among the population. Though the author is, as I said, the sensible, moderate type, who hastens to add that there still tends to be a regression towards the mean that precludes reconstituting society based on heredity, though some in the Conservative Party have begun to call for this. The Labour Party in this universe has renamed itself the Technicians' Party, and all organizations with labor or worker in the name have over time renamed themselves. Unions are barely a force in politics at all. This chunk of society, though not as reactionary as the country's right wing, is content to advocate for preserving their cherished equality of opportunity. They believe they possess it anyhow, and they haggle over the material gaps in compensation between different jobs in society and IQ levels, but take for granted that of course the most intelligent and wise should not just govern, but rule. My favorite tidbit of the work is in the final footnote of the essay, which reports with regret that the author of the essay was killed shortly after its publication by a revolt of lower class and, tautologically in the world of the author, less capable and less intelligent peoples, led largely by women who never forgot their marks, had some grasp of social reproduction theory, and wanted the return of common schools unsegregated by intelligence, and a return to recognizing experience and age in compensation and promotion, as well as a far larger share of the material gains of increased productivity for something they called the working class, terminology quaintly outdated to the author. It's worth noting that the work that introduced the word meritocracy in a modern sense ends with a poignant lesson. The author, so assured, intelligent, and matter-of-fact in his recounting of the history of glorious meritocracy, dismisses these populists out of hand, thinks of their movement as a political brushfire at best, and they fucking own the shit out of him. Still, the book does sort of conflate a system of literal rule by merit with one that merely holds it supreme in terms of hiring, promotion, and access to material goods and services, and says very little about the role of race in any of this. It's particularly glaring when the subject turns towards the reemergence of eugenics as a legitimate and respectable discipline in that universe. It also tends to focus mostly on the UK, which can make following the alternate history a little tough if you're not much familiar with the actual history of the UK during that time, but you can check it out if you're so interested. It's free to find. One thing Dr. Young does nail, I think, though, is how such an ideology is tailor-made for the post-World War II era. This is a time period some economists call the Great Compression, the 30-some-odd years after the World War, where the gap between the poorest and richest in society, well, was greatly compressed in the United States. And to this era I now turn. The ideology of meritocracy exploded during this period and yet persists, partially because it was so nearly true. I dare not say true. Avenues for advancement were never universalized across geography, race, religion, ethnicity, gender identity, probably at least a dozen other human factors. Additionally, then as now, like I said, society valued some professions more than others, and near and dear to me will always be the colossal blooms of art, music, and literature that will forever be literally unknowable to us, as so many hands failed and still fail to nurture so many seeds. Yet, it was all probably more true then than now, and with a fair bit of luck, patience, and, well, merit, one could rise in the world to enjoy a comfortable existence and secure some future for their children. I don't want to be myopic or even worse, vain, but my own family is illustrative, I think, and they lived throughout this time period. My father's father never got a college degree, never had a job that required one. My father's mother did some teaching and caring for little kids for pay sometimes, but they were undoubtedly working class and primarily one income. And they both raised 3 children and eventually owned their own home. My father also never got a bachelor's degree, though he did go to a technical school after retiring from the military to learn heating, cooling, and refrigeration. He's owned several pieces of property, and not since I was a wee baby have I known him to ever pay rent, only a mortgage. I do not know where he lives, how he is doing, or if he ever even thinks about me at all. But I know I'm more highly educated than he is. My mother's father didn't have an education before he joined the military, but thanks to the GI Bill, he eventually got one. He taught high school and college level classes eventually, and has degrees in biology and computer science. He was working class, certainly, but also eventually a highly educated professional. My mother's mother I never knew to work for a salary or wage. Not that she didn't work, of course, but they too eventually owned their home on a single income and raised 3 children. My mother makes a comfortable living as an accountant, has paid a mortgage and not rent for years, possesses a similar level of education to me, and thinks of me as a detestable failure of a man whose wife has been on the verge of leaving him for going on 5 years now. We will set parental opinion aside for the simple reason that I don't agree with all that, and hope you don't either, dear listener. But we will talk a little bit about yours truly. I, like many of you probably, grew up in a world that stressed the importance of grades, extracurricular activities, honors, awards, test scores, well-crafted essays. I mostly excelled at all that, and by such measures of merit, I think I possessed a sizable amount, or thought I did anyway. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, and one tricky thing about meritocracy is that it postures as unfalsifiable. Society measures merit to varying degrees of accuracy, and through this, those with more of it tend to work better jobs and live better lives. So the story goes anyway. But that means that by definition, if you don't enjoy those things, then you lack the requisite merit. Those with enough merit always get to define those who don't have quite enough. And as the pool of jobs that actually enable one to live a stable and comfortable existence has drastically contracted, so those of us without merit have multiplied. The old have always tended to envy and thus hate the young, true. But it is this phenomenon that is partially responsible for the endless articles and reports about how they just don't make young people like they used to. So spoiled and stupid. Millennials are usually the targets that come to mind, but doubtless this trend will continue with the generations, as long as there continue to be millions of people with decent educations, talents, and abilities that fail to find spots in the cult of merit. It is this lot that I place myself with sincerely and honestly, even though I feel ashamed of my relative privilege, fearful that my failures are inexcusable and personal, and yet resentful of my relative poverty, for I have not joined the professional class, but I doubt I am alone. The cult has other victims too. I have a bachelor's of science. It would take me at least 3 more years of full-time work if I wanted to try to get a law degree. It takes a great deal of education and credentialing to qualify to practice law in the United States, and yet our nation has for years produced far more people with legal educations than jobs for those with legal educations. Generally speaking, people highly educated in the humanities all face incredible odds fighting decent jobs that have something to do with their educations, but it is a myth that math, engineering, and computer science are much better off these days. These spots were more multiple at a time, true, but never as endless as the boosters claim, and at any rate have been subjected to years of hand-wringing about how the country needs less people who study dumb shit like philosophy, art, history, or music, and more who study JavaScript and HTML5. People absorbed that message, took its advice, and discovered a pot of fool's gold. I've said nothing much so far about those who have less than a bachelor's degree, which is actually 2/3 of the U.S. population over 25 years old. For those with less than a 4-year diploma, huge numbers actually have some college credits or an associate's degree, but this means they often carry the debt from such endeavors with even less possibility of recruitment through increased wages. They too were sold the vision of meritocracy, that through education a better life was possible for them, but I'd mean sold it, for getting the money out of them was ever the only point. For still others, all this is but a dream, a fantasy that to fulfill would require miraculous changes to their world. People who not only lack the material resources, but can't even imagine a plausible scenario in which they were obtained, save holding their breath and taking a loan. How does one save for the tuition and expenses of getting a college education, working a job that doesn't require a college education? It is impossible. But what about those who, through luck, ability, and support from others, appear to obtain the dream? What of they who do become working lawyers, programmers, accountants, professionals with so-called good jobs, who emerged from the meritocracy with gold stars? The vast majority are not as lucky as all that. For one, most of them carry large debt burdens from financing years of education and then studying when they could have been working. For another, the good jobs are far less good than they used to be. Even in the finance and ID departments, they are always asking for more work done faster by less people. And professors are increasingly mystical nomads, ascetic in habit, who travel from campus to campus, spreading knowledge for a pittance, adjunct from the university, not a true part of it. Yet the meritocracy is ever preached to them too, that with ever more time, experience, training, education, they might do better, might prove finally that they deserve more. I hate all of it. The meritocracy has always been less than half true, and rings ever falser with each marching moment. Knowledge is said to be its own reward, but it's a bitter prize to realize that the entire framework for how to rise in the world is a lie. Were we to live in a world that truly rewarded merit, though, Helen Adams Keller would have been queen. She who overcame blindness and deafness both, to become not just literate but a woman of letters, a gifted writer and activist on behalf of the poor, and a committed socialist. Quote, I had once believed that we were all masters of our fate, that we could mold our lives into any form we pleased. I had overcome deafness and blindness sufficiently to be happy, and I supposed that anyone could come out victorious if he threw himself valiantly into life's struggle. But as I went about the country more and more, I learned that I had spoken on a subject that I knew little about. I learned that the power to rise is not within reach of everyone. End quote. The power to rise is not within reach of everyone. Why? We might speak of how the open spots to rise into are limited, or that those currently floating above control who is allowed to rise. It could be pointed out that to be non-white in meritocratic America is often enough by itself to be excluded from rising. We might speak of all of these things and more. We could tinker endlessly with generating more good spots, ensuring that those who rise can be of whatever race or religion or gender identity or sexuality, to hold the phrase equality of opportunity in reverent regard. I don't think that was card-carrying communist Helen Keller's real point, though. Such a system still requires a mass at the bottom and few at the top, and it is that mass upon which the whole structure rests. Whether it is possible for some to escape the heap is irrelevant if the heap is always there. Meritocracy tells us they are there because it must be that way. If they were capable of more, they would, definitionally, achieve more. And that's really the point of all this. The definitions are all fucked up. We have no frame of reference. We're like children who wandered into the middle of a movie. And the beneficiaries are really those who get to have the most merit, because they rule. They do not rule because they have the most merit. Their children can be as dumb, as smart as you like, as lazy or as diligent, it doesn't matter. They will be taken care of, in all likelihood find some comfortable place in the world, and the meritocracy will have no consequence for them. Indeed, it will set them atop it. Such an ideology is for the rest of us, the bums, not the achievers, and the bums will always lose. Unless, that is, we realize that we're all capable of being bums, and that every bum deserves to eat well, sleep warm, see a doctor if they need, that kind of thing. Even if they sometimes forget which days are weekdays and which days aren't. Even the laziest bums, who seem to lack all merit by standard definitions, can prove more true and worthy than the highest achievers. For it is the big Lebowski who is a phony, and it is the dude who's a real one. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it didn't sound like I was whining too much. I don't come off as too pathetic. Anyway, patreon.com/dissidentpeasant, paypal.me/dissidentpeasant. That's the tip jar. Throw a few dollars in there, please. DissidentPeasant.com is always headquarters. My Twitter is @JeffHisDudeness. See you next time.
Thanks, Gary. Well, take care, man. Gotta get back.
Sure. Take it easy, dude.
Oh, yeah.
I know that you will.
Yeah, well, the dude abides.
The dude abides. I don't know about you, but I take comfort in that. It's good knowing he's out there, the dude, taking her easy for all us sinners. Shush. I sure hope he makes the finals. Well, that about does her. Wraps her all up.